All right, well, we're back for our final our meat product for this round of Meat Market Minutes. We're going to dive on in to discuss what's going on in the beef product market. And for that, we've got Dr. Kenny Burdine from University of Kentucky, and he's going to share with us kind of what he's seeing in the beef market at the moment. So, Kenny, I'll go ahead and let you take it away.
Thanks, Justin. Looking forward to sharing some of my thoughts and hearing some others' thoughts as well. Well, it is a little bit different, which I think is good. And I'm going to bring a little different perspective, and I think it's part of the neat thing about the Meat Market Minutes is we all do it a little bit different. Something that David said when he did beef, I guess that's back in September, is that it's been a constant of adjustment. And as I was putting this together, yeah, we've done a lot of adjusting, but the truth is we're not anywhere near done. You know, we don't know exactly where food service is heading in the short run in a lot of cases. I'm really interested too in just how sticky consumer behavior is. I think a lot of us have gotten much more accustomed to carry out, much more accustomed to eating at home. You know, just frankly, much less dependent on going out. And I think that may stick around for a while. We're also kind of in a transitional time in terms of demand and seasonality. The reason I've got the picture up there on the lower right is not so much that I think it's a fantastic picture. It's taken on my grill. It's just 3 burgers that I was grilling. What's interesting to me was when I went back through my pictures, I took that picture on December 27th. And I thought, that's probably unusual. Most people slow down grilling a whole lot from, November to March. And I think that's the first thing to understand is that, a piece of the beef market is very grilling oriented, and we lose a good chunk of that, this time of year. James did a great job in Cattle Market Notes this very week talking about, the seasonal movement in ribeye prices, for example. And this time of year does lend itself more to things like prime rib, a bit more to roast, and, your basic holidays. And I think as we think about changes this year, it may open the door maybe to some less traditional types of products for some smaller family gatherings. I wanted to focus as much as I could on the retail, and what I'm showing you here to begin with is just a basic price chart, retail prices. This is not a perfect series by any means, but it's got beef, it's got pork, and it's got broilers on there. So this is kind of a long run. This is roughly 15 years of data. But if you go back and look at the actual numbers and try to compare, how does beef price compare on a percentage basis to pork and then to chicken? There's been an increase, obviously, over time, which makes sense. But over time, beef has also increased proportionally more so than the other two. And again, this goes back about 15 years. Now, the next thing I'm showing you is really just the last piece of that. So I'm showing you the last few years. Oh, sorry. This is the last few years. This is the last 6 years. And what I want to point out, though, is that those prices have actually been pretty flat. And if I look at that same exact ratio, basically beef price is a percentage of pork price and broiler price, what you see is it's been pretty constant. The one exception was what we saw during COVID. And my take home here is that, meat prices have increased over time across the board, which makes sense. And when they increase, beef prices tend to increase proportionally more than the other two main meats consumers eat. And that was also true during COVID. And you can see that for that period of time there, kind of spring to summer, we see a much bigger spike in retail beef price than we did in pork, or than we did in broiler prices. Everybody has shown something like this, but this is kind of a wholesale price. And you can see kind of the COVID spike there in the spring. I just want to focus really quickly on 2 things. Look kind of pre-COVID, blue line's 2020, where wholesale prices were for box beef on average. And then notice here now post-COVID, well post-COVID, or post the main processing disruption of COVID, we're again below where we were last year. And I think that's interesting because when you look at retail, we can't tell the same story. Retail prices have not moved below where they were last year. In fact, they're still at a somewhat premium, something like 10% above where they were this time last year, despite the fact that wholesale prices have. So I think this means 2 things. Number one, I think it means that retailers, frankly, were not able to raise prices in the same way that wholesale prices rose, back in spring, summer, which makes sense, right? I think they're trying to leave themselves some room for what I would call more normal retail marketing strategies, which are, prices set and then a lot of featuring. Last chart I'll show you here, I just picked out 3 retail price series and grabbed 3 that I thought were the most representative. I don't have a really good upper end steak price, but the red line there is sirloin steaks over the last 3 years. Blue line there is chuck roast, and then black line there is ground beef. But again, the point that I want to make is if you look at where these prices were pre-COVID in all 3 cases, where they are this fall, they're higher than they were pre-COVID at the retail level. And again, this is somewhat anecdotal, but when I go to the grocery store here locally, and we're all kind of, regionalized, but I am starting to see more feature. We've seen some good buys here locally on ribeyes the last few weeks. I don't know if y'all are seeing this or not, but the price on brisket has just been amazing. $2 a pound for choice brisket in some retail places. So I'm just seeing a lot of interesting things that may be related to some featuring and kind of some expectation of some larger gatherings maybe coming up. Two questions I think are key going forward for the beef market is, are we going to see more changes in food service? One thing we've learned from most everything in our markets is the first time something happens is always the biggest impact. And I don't think we're going to see the extent of what we saw, back in the spring. But as COVID cases rise, there are absolutely discussion about changing some hours and availability at the food service level, and that tends to impact from our upper end meat markets some. The other thing is, a lot of our restaurants had dealt with capacity issues by expanding some of the outdoor seating possibilities. And obviously, as the weather gets cooler, that becomes less and less of a possibility. So it'll be interesting how they work through some of those kind of things, even if there aren't more restrictions put in place. And then finally, I would just say that, a lot of folks I think are going to have less traditional holidays in the sense that, their Thanksgiving probably won't have as many folks as it usually would. And does that open up the door for some, for some less traditional meats on the table? And I'm thinking about things like prime rib or some roast, that maybe we don't think of as a turkey. So that to me is interesting in terms of transition and what the next few weeks might hold. And as always, I appreciate the invite and look forward to some discussion.
Kenny, I think you mentioned like you've been seeing more showcasing or whatever at the grocery store. Here in Tennessee, I've actually been seeing more like membership type discounts, whether it's Costco, Sam's, Kroger. I've been seeing dramatic discounts, and you kind of answered some of the questions I had. But moving forward from here on out through the rest of 2020 and into the beginning of 2021, during the heart of COVID, the backlog was the big notorious thing being talked about, and supply issues that were going to have some chain reactions. Do you think some of that still part is kind of being fizzled out a little bit leading into 2021 that could, pressure prices one way or the other? Or do you think this is just more of a changing of consumer preferences a little?
Well, like a lot of things, Charlie, I think it's some of both. There's no doubt in my mind that some of the changes in consumer behavior are going to stick around for a bit. I think we've changed a lot of our habits. Our lifestyles are different now. And, case in point, oftentimes if we went out to eat, it was on my way home from work, right? And that's a very different environment now than it used to be. So there's a consumer side as well. As far as the production side, though, in the backlog, a lot of evidence, I think, points to the fact that, we've worked through a lot of the backlog in the meat system, meaning in the livestock system. But if you look at weights, and if you look at raw numbers, there's, we've definitely pushed some meat production that was going to be probably fourth quarter 2020 into first quarter 2021, and that's just kind of a natural thing that happened because we backed so many up back in the spring. It just takes some time. So some of both, I think, Charlie.
One of the things I've been curious about a lot, and trying to look around, read some things, and so I think it would be interesting for, a group of us to sort of talk about what we think is going to be permanent out of this. What becomes a permanent change? What sticks with us? When we get a vaccine, if we all take the vaccine, do we immediately go back to the way it was a year ago? I have no idea. What are the changes we've seen are going to be permanent? I think some of the grocery store shopping where they go, somebody does it for you and brings it out to you or delivers it to your house. That stuff may be with us forever. But I just wonder about, the restaurant things, stuff like that. What changes are permanent? I don't know. But I think it's an interesting thing as it affects different cuts of meat, different, beef, pork, chicken, the whole works. I think it's pretty interesting. And I don't really know that I have a good answer.
Well, David, I think you've talked through the vaccine part of this and the COVID restrictions on eating out. I think the other part of that it's going to be more long lasting is the economic effects of COVID-19, and with unemployment and families trying to save and spend less and eat out less for those reasons will continue to play a role too.
I think that's a good point because, we see huge numbers of unemployed people. Look at the lines of folks at the food bank in Dallas over the weekend, the last few days over the weekend, huge numbers of folks that we've lost whole sectors of our economy. Yet for those of us who still have a job and are working, if you look at the data on savings as a percent of per capita income, savings are through the roof because folks are at home and they're not going out and spending. And so, I think there's a divergence of folks going, that we're seeing happen in sectors of our economy, and how we come back from that, I think is really a pretty critical question going forward. I think you bring up a good point.
Yeah, one more too. I try not to use anecdotal stuff, when I talk about things sometimes because, they're not always representative, but I've been interested by looking at fast food restaurants, really going back to spring. And the lines in some of these drive-thrus just blow my mind at times. And a lot of these fast food chains simply are not opening for people to come sit down and eat. And I wonder if that's going to become the norm for some of them. Have they made a decision that, we can get really efficient with our drive-thru? We don't have to worry about keeping up, tables and chairs and facilities and bathrooms for folks that come in, and really focus more on the carryout. And that may be something that sticks around for a while too, I think.
Just like Andrew said, kind of following that Sonic model.
Yeah. I think some hits our own personal preference or choice sets ourselves, and so for me, I haven't been to a restaurant since February. I've done takeout because I've been trying to do takeout at little places, folks that need the help. So we've done a lot of that, but do people, how does our, the whole distribution of population, how they feel about stuff? How fast do we go back to restaurants, to sitting inside? What's kind of the path of that, I think is pretty important. Now, this is about the time Justin will say, well, yeah, you're getting old. You better stay out of them places.
We worry about your health, or we actually worry about you slipping and falling more than anything.
That's right. Not too steady. But it will be interesting to see as our whole population, with the speed that we go back, and do we go back?
I think that's a great point. Well, if nobody else has anything else, I guess that wraps up this quarter's version of Meat Market Minutes. We appreciate y'all's help, and for all the people out here watching, I sure hope that y'all join us for the next round. And happy holidays, happy Thanksgiving, happy Christmas, whatever it may be out there. So thank y'all very much.